The Yale Law School auditorium grew deathly quiet as Judge Judy's face turned purple with rage, her famous finger pointing at Jasmine Crockett while her voice cracked with fury. "You're an ignorant little girl who thinks reading law books makes you a lawyer." The television judge's entire body shook with indignation. But Crockett stood calmly at her podium, waiting for the tirade to end before delivering the words that would end Judge Judy's empire. "You're not a judge anymore. You're a performer profiting from pain." The law students watched in stunned silence as America's most famous judge suddenly began trembling, her mouth opening and closing without sound, before she turned and fled the stage. The confrontation that would demolish Judge Judy's carefully constructed image of judicial authority took place at Yale Law School's prestigious Criminal Justice Reform Symposium, where two vastly different visions of American justice collided. Judge Judy Sheindlin had built a $400 million fortune turning courtroom proceedings into entertainment, her harsh treatment of defendants becoming comfort food for viewers who enjoyed watching poor people being humiliated. Her $47 million annual salary came from dispensing theatrical contempt rather than actual justice. Jasmine Crockett represented everything Judge Judy dismissed, a young black woman who had spent years in real courtrooms defending clients who couldn't afford representation, who understood that justice wasn't a punchline but a matter of life and death. This collision between entertainment masquerading as justice and actual legal expertise would prove more devastating than anyone anticipated. The symposium had begun with typical academic decorum. Judge Judy arrived in her signature black robe, despite not having presided over an actual court in decades, immediately commanding attention with her practiced authority. Her opening remarks dismissed criminal justice reform as soft-on-crime nonsense promoted by people who had never faced real criminals. She spoke with the same condescending certainty that had made her famous, treating complex systemic issues as simple matters of personal responsibility. When Crockett began her presentation on wrongful convictions and racial disparities in sentencing, Judge Judy's theatrical size and eye rolls were visible from the back row. The tension exploded when Judge Judy interrupted Crockett mid-sentence, her voice dripping with the same contempt she showed TV litigants. "This is exactly the problem with today's legal system," she declared, wagging her finger dramatically. "We have politicians like Representative Crockett, who's never sat on a real bench, telling us how justice should work. She doesn't understand that criminals need consequences, not excuses." She continued, her voice rising with each word. "You're just a politician playing lawyer, pushing bleeding-heart liberal fantasies that enable criminals and endanger law-abiding citizens." The law students shifted uncomfortably as Judge Judy continued her assault, treating Crockett like a defendant on her show rather than a fellow panelist. She interrupted every attempt Crockett made to present data, dismissing statistics about racial disparities as excuses for bad behavior and wrongful convictions as rare exceptions blown out of proportion by activists. Her performance was vintage Judge Judy, aggressive, dismissive, and designed to humiliate rather than engage. But Crockett remained composed, taking notes while Judge Judy ranted about real justice and her decades of experience. When Judge Judy finally paused, Crockett pulled out a folder that would change everything. "Judge Sheindlin, you mention your experience on the bench. Let's examine that experience." She began presenting data from Judge Judy's actual court records from her time as a family court judge before television. The statistics were damning. Judge Judy had the highest rate of removing children from poor families in New York's family court system. She gave wealthy parents multiple chances while removing children from poor families on first offenses. 78% of her custody removals involved Black and Latino families, despite them representing only 35% of her cases. The audience of law students began murmuring as Crockett continued through the data. Judge Judy had consistently imposed maximum sentences on minority defendants while showing leniency to white defendants for identical offenses. She had denied requests for court-appointed translators, telling Spanish-speaking defendants to learn English or lose your kids. She had once removed 3 children from a mother who was 5 minutes late to court due to subway delays, placing them in foster care, where they were subsequently abused. Each revelation painted a picture of a judge who had wielded her power to punish poverty rather than dispense justice. Judge Judy attempted to deflect, claiming the cases were being misrepresented, but Crockett had court transcripts. She read Judge Judy's own words from the bench, statements so callous that several law students gasped. To a homeless mother seeking custody, if you can't afford an apartment, you can't afford a child. To a father working 3 minimum wage jobs, maybe if you'd gotten an education, you wouldn't be in this position. To a grandmother seeking custody of her grandchild, at your age, with your health, you're being selfish. Each quote revealed the cruelty that had made Judge Judy perfect for television but disastrous for actual justice. The first major twist came when Crockett revealed Judge Judy's financial entanglements with the prison industrial complex. She presented investment records showing Judge Judy owned millions in private prison stocks, profiting directly from mass incarceration. She had donated extensively to politicians who opposed criminal justice reform, bail reform, and sentence reduction. Most damning were emails between Judge Judy's production company and private prison lobbyists discussing synergy opportunities between her show's law and order messaging and their efforts to maintain high incarceration rates. Crockett read from one particularly revealing email where a prison corporation executive thanked Judge Judy for her invaluable contribution to maintaining public support for necessary incarceration policies. Another email discussed how her show helped shape public perception about crime and punishment in ways that benefit our industry. The law students sat in stunned silence as they realized America's most famous judge was literally profiting from imprisonment of the very people she claimed to be helping through tough love. Judge Judy's face had gone from its usual stern expression to something approaching panic. She stood abruptly, attempting to use her height and presence to dominate the space, but her voice betrayed her desperation. These are lies. Fabrications. You don't understand the complexities of investment portfolios. But Crockett was ready with more evidence. She presented Judge Judy's speaking fees from conferences hosted by bail bond companies, corrections officer unions, and private prison corporations. Over the past decade, she had earned millions speaking at events promoting harsher sentences and opposing reform. The climactic moment arrived when Crockett presented her final piece of evidence, a compilation video of Judge Judy's most abusive moments on television, not for entertainment, but analyzed through the lens of judicial ethics. She showed how Judge Judy had violated virtually every canon of judicial conduct, from prejudging cases to showing bias based on appearance to denying litigants the right to present evidence. "This isn't justice," Crockett said, her voice carrying moral authority. "It's a minstrel show where desperate people perform their poverty for Middle America's entertainment while you collect $47 million a year." Judge Judy exploded, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. She pointed at Crockett, her hands shaking with rage, and screamed, "You know nothing about justice. I've been dispensing justice since before you were born. You're an ignorant little girl who thinks reading law books makes you a lawyer. I've helped millions of people understand the law." Her face was purple, spittle flying as she continued, "You're jealous of my success. You're trying to destroy me because I tell the truth about personal responsibility." Crockett waited for the tirade to end, then delivered her devastating final response. "Judge Sheindlin, you haven't dispensed justice in decades. You've dispensed entertainment at the expense of desperate people. You turned human suffering into a $400 million fortune while investing in the companies that cage those same humans. You claim to teach law, but you violate every principle of judicial ethics for ratings. You're not a judge anymore. You're a performer profiting from pain. The only verdict that matters is that history will remember you as someone who sold justice for ratings." She paused, then delivered the final blow. "You made your fortune pretending to help people while investing in their incarceration. You built an empire on humiliating the poor while protecting the wealthy. You perverted justice into a game show where desperate people dance for your amusement. That's not justice, Judge Sheindlin. That's exploitation. And everyone in this room knows it." Judge Judy stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without producing words. Her hands began visibly trembling as the weight of her exposure crashed down on her. The law students watched in shocked silence as America's toughest television judge suddenly looked small and fragile. Without warning, she turned and walked off the stage, her famous confident stride replaced by unsteady steps. She didn't even take her materials, leaving behind the evidence of her corruption for all to see. The image of Judge Judy fleeing, while trembling, became the defining moment of her career's end. Within minutes, #JudyExposed was trending worldwide. Law schools across the country began using the confrontation as a case study in judicial ethics and the corruption of justice for entertainment. The California Bar Association announced an investigation into whether Judge Judy's television show violated legal ethics rules. Multiple lawsuits were filed by former litigants who claimed they were exploited for entertainment. Private prison corporations quickly distanced themselves, claiming they had no formal relationship with her despite the emails Crockett had revealed. The immediate aftermath was catastrophic for Judge Judy's empire. CBS announced they were reviewing their relationship with her production company. Streaming services pulled episodes that were particularly egregious in their treatment of poor and minority litigants. Her speaking agency reported that all upcoming engagements had been canceled. Legal organizations that had previously honored her began rescinding awards. The woman who had spent 25 years as America's television judge found herself exposed as someone who had perverted justice for profit. This moment at Yale Law School will be remembered as more than just the destruction of Judge Judy's career. It was the moment when entertainment masquerading as justice finally faced real legal expertise. When theatrical cruelty met constitutional knowledge. When a performer who played a judge encountered someone who actually understood law. As Jasmine Crockett said in an interview the following week, Judge Judy thought her ratings made her untouchable, that her fortune justified her methods. She learned that day that real justice isn't about humiliation or entertainment. It's about truth, fairness, and protecting the vulnerable. She spent decades perverting those principles for profit. History won't remember her as a judge. It will remember her as a cautionary tale about what happens when justice becomes a commodity.